Yeah, I think we start and people turn up when they...
Ahí se hemos dado minutos. Bueno, buenos días a todos. Bueno, para aquellos que no me conozcáis, que ya es raro, soy Rafa Zapardiel, soy el departamento de ventas de Datos Media y para esta presentación contamos con Craig Dyer, que es el Senior Director del Global Center of Excellence de Avid. Como sabéis, esta presentación va sobre Avid in the Cloud, o el Newsroom in the Cloud. Como sabéis, los servicios en la nube optimizan las capacidades de producción de contenidos, permitiendo a los usuarios trabajar de forma más eficiente, colaborar y facilitar el acceso y el trabajo en proyectos desde cualquier lugar, usando cualquier dispositivo, además de que permite a los grupos de comunicación un modelo económico que es flexible y ajustado a las necesidades reales de producción. Craig nos va a hablar de las últimas tendencias en la industria en este espacio, los servicios recientemente lanzados o anunciados, en el NAB de Avid On Demand y la situación para la certificación de Media Central Platform sobre Microsoft Azure. Sin más, le cedo la palabra a Craig y que él os va a hablar en un perfecto inglés. La clase de inglés no la cobramos, ¿vale? Venga, Craig.
Thank you. Oh, very loud. Good morning. So, so I'm going to talk this morning about the journey that Avid is on, moving our solutions into the cloud, and help you understand and give you some examples of some use cases where we see the cloud being very relevant to news production, post-production, and asset management. So I'll jump straight into it. So we've been looking at how the cloud IT landscape is evolving and really beginning to understand the relevance for our customers and the workloads that they have today running in their on-prem environments. And what a lot of our clients are looking for, and that we were looking for from the cloud, is really about flexibility. So the ability to be able to turn services on and off, so kind of in an elastic model, so dynamically provision more infrastructure and then reduce it. But also people want that to be combined, that flexibility, with the workflows. A minute. With the workflows. Oh, the English version, okay. Okay. So in addition to having the flexibility, what clients also have told us is that they want the workflows to be basically modeled so that they understand them from a post-production or a news perspective. People really want to be able to provision additional editing or additional storage and not worry about the underlying cloud infrastructure. The other thing that our clients have told us that they're looking for is what they call a hybrid approach, right? So that to be able to go from an on-premise environment in your own data center and then go out to the cloud and make that very seamless. So it's very easy to move between the private cloud or your own infrastructure and the public cloud. So that was something else we were looking for. And lastly, certainly at this early stage in the cloud, what we were looking for was a partner that we could work with, and actually we selected Microsoft and their Azure cloud as our preferred cloud partner. So what we're trying to deliver here is really the promise of cloud and virtualization, right? So if you look at your environments today on-prem, you have a lot of physical infrastructure within your facility, and that is not very flexible. It can't be changed and reconfigured that easily. It certainly can't be scaled up and down. And what clients are looking for is the idea that they have these sort of logical services or that they can adapt and use in an on-demand way. So that's kind of really the philosophy that we're working through. So, you know, if you think about how productions work, you have sort of projects, you have teams, you've got certain workflows. Those really are the sort of organizing principles, not the IT infrastructure. So it's what we're doing is wrapping the cloud in a way that makes it very logical that you can use it in your projects. So there are a number of things that we need to do to make the cloud real for us in our Avid Newsroom workflows. So obviously there's things like virtualization. Many clients are already running virtualized environments inside their existing enterprise. But it's making that cohesive and making that easily movable to the cloud is kind of one of the things that we're working on. The other is, of course, if you've got your workloads running in the cloud, you really need a flexible way of getting assets in and out of the cloud. So we're also working on IP interfaces that allow you to very easily record live into the cloud, go from post-production to the cloud, take your archive to the cloud. So all of those kind of use cases are going to be very important as people want to bring more and more of their content into these cloud environments. The next one, this cloud deployment models. This is really, when you look at where a lot of the benefits come from cloud, it's the ability to be able to deploy dynamically and provision environments. So, for example, if you need more resources like storage or transcoding or even editing on demand, the ability to be able to just turn that on and pay for what you're using requires this deployment model. It's like scripting so that you can launch that environment. So again, if you've got an on-premise infrastructure today, it's actually quite complex to deploy, to manage those systems. And this is one of the big advantages of cloud. Highly automated, sometimes people call them DevOps, development operations environments. And everything's very, very scalable and very dynamic. So virtualization of media services, within our systems, we have a number of components that can scale. So transcoding, copying, moving assets, these become key components that we want to be able to virtualize and make flexible as well. Provisioning and management, I've talked a little bit about that already, and that sort of really links to this on-demand cloud services, to be able to dynamically provision up and down. And lastly, what I've been doing over the last couple of years is doing a lot of work with our clients to look at the specific use cases that they see are going to be most relevant. So the other thing that we see with the cloud is that there's, if you sort of step back a bit, you can see that once you've got assets in the cloud, you can start to create some very flexible connected workflows. So again, a lot of our clients are looking at really their supply chain integration. So the ability to be able to work from individual artists, maybe who are writing music for a TV show, all the way into the sort of creative team that might be shooting the whole show or doing post-production, out until to the broadcaster. Once you're working in the cloud, actually you can remove a lot of cost and a lot of friction, a lot of time moving between those steps, because the content is already somewhere where everybody can reach it. So these kind of workflows actually add a lot of flexibility. They also add, surprisingly, a lot of security, because if you don't have to keep moving the files and make lots of copies, you actually end up having a much more secure environment. So that's another reason that a lot of clients are very interested. So just to set some context, you know, what we're doing sort of at a worldwide level is working with a lot of clients now who see the bigger benefits of having an enterprise agreement with Avid, and the cloud becomes one of the components that they're trying to bring into this solution. So for example, they're looking at a multi-year agreement, and then we're working with them in partnership to really plan out when it's logical to move workloads to the cloud. The other thing that we've been doing a lot on is our Pro Tools and Media Composer First. These actually use the cloud for collaboration services. So if you're using Pro Tools First, for example, I can download a copy, my colleague Gonzalo can download a copy, and we can collaborate online sharing a project. That project is stored in the Azure cloud. So everything from the biggest enterprises to even the individual artists are now starting to use some of these capabilities. So one of the things I've decided to talk you through today was really how we see the cloud working when we connect it across a newsroom environment. So for those of you who operate in a newsroom, right, you understand, I'm sure, that the environment has a number of different components in it. You've got different departments, different functions, but more and more what people are wanting to do is work in a very, very seamless way, right? So social media and online and television, they really want to organize themselves around the story rather than the channels, and make sure that everybody is continuously well informed and starting to use analytics to understand how the stories are performing, how their competition are telling the story. It's a very data-driven environment now, much more than it has been. So what we're showing here really is an example of the different functions, and I'll step through them where the cloud can enhance them, sitting on top of our infrastructure. So our platform, Media Central platform, is really the layer that connects all the different services together, the applications, even our partner apps are included in that layer. And we're showing the Media Central Cloud UX on the Datos stand here today. But if you look at the lower level, right, so this is kind of like a layered architecture. You've got the workflow at the top, the business apps, then you've got the infrastructure, and then lastly you've got the cloud. So everything from on-premise to hybrid to public cloud, you know, being able to deploy very flexibly across those environments. So if you think about where the cloud can help in news gathering, you know, one of the big advantages is that you've got increased capabilities once you are uploading your content to the cloud, right? So a lot of people want to be able to, you know, a big trend we see in news is more and more organizations want the journalists out of the newsroom. They want them in the field, they want them where the stories are happening, but they don't want to give up a lot of editorial control. So they want apps running on tablets and low-cost devices. They want to be able to work remotely in the field very effectively. And the cloud becomes very useful when you're starting to upload content into the cloud, and then, of course, anyone in the organization can find content immediately and work with it. The other thing that we see is the idea that people want to be able to keep their crews connected to the station and make sure that they're getting sort of content from the station back to the field. So quite often what is happening in production in the field is that there will be material feeds coming into the station, those will be put into the cloud, and then the journalists can see, you know, the other wire stories, the other stories in the context of what they're doing on their mobile device in the field. And that allows them to make sure when they're presenting, they've got the context of the whole package. So again, the cloud really gives an advantage to being able to keep people very well connected to your content as it develops. So there's a lot of interest at the moment as well, continuing, and some pretty, you know, interesting dynamics happening now, where people want to be able to, and I think it's become much more common to announce or to launch a story first on social media. News often now will break on social media, and the newscast becomes much more about reframing the story, providing more context, some different opinions. So being able to kind of keep that whole storyline clear and keeping everybody briefed is really important. And again, the cloud can help us by doing data analysis and being able to present the relevant information. So content exploitation, this is interesting when you look at, so one capability that's become quite popular in the cloud is this idea of artificial intelligence or machine learning. So within the cloud systems, what they're doing is they're using high levels of graphics processing engines to be able to do this machine learning content recognition. And this allows you to mine, for example, could allow you to mine your archive. So if you have an archive, maybe it's not that well documented, or if it is documented, quite often that documentation is still on paper or on legacy systems. But by putting the archive in the cloud and running these intelligent services across the media, you can extract a lot of knowledge and insight. So it can recognize spoken word, it can recognize text in the graphics. If you've got a database of, for example, famous people, or you can use in the Microsoft world, they have a database of celebrities, it will identify people's faces as well as their expressions. So it's incredibly powerful, and that can be used to help you find, if you like, sort of assets that you don't realize you've got. And in news, especially, time is so important. It's valuable in the next 20 minutes. It's not valuable if we find it next week. If we have the story now, we want to be able to use as much as we've got. So this is a kind of benefit of once you've put the assets in the cloud, you can run these, what they call cognitive services against those, against that media. It's worth also mentioning that you don't have to have the high-res media in the cloud. So some clients have the high-res media in their own facility, and they take the proxies, the lower resolution files, and they put them in the cloud, so that much lower cost, and then you can still run all of the artificial intelligence and cognitive services against the media, and then we take the metadata and we bring it back so it's associated with the high res. So this is a really nice workflow. Lots of people are very interested in this approach because they're spending a huge amount of money storing archives, which in many cases they really can't use very easily. They can use them for dramas, documentaries, when they have time to go into the archive with researchers, but when they use it in the context of news, it's very difficult to make the archive kind of make sense. Okay, so actually I've already covered some of that. This is, again, sort of metadata enrichment. And you'll see there's a huge area of, lots of work going in this arena. The other thing that we're doing is we're taking these models and we're allowing customers to adapt the model as well. So you can train your own machine learning to recognize perhaps your own presenters' faces or your own celebrities, right? So obviously the worldwide databases may not have some of your special commentators or sort of specialists that you would use. So this is, I think, another big area that we're seeing more and more interest in is the whole sort of business intelligence. So adding a layer of information that allows you to run your business much more efficiently. So if you think about how these functions work today, it's very difficult to join up the pieces. Like my production staff are shooting a story, the story goes into post-production, it gets produced, it goes on air, but then it goes to the archive. Knowing how often your content's being reused, what teams are most efficient. So we have some clients who are doing, not in news yet, but on the entertainment side. So we have a client who creates a huge amount of OTT content, the biggest in the world. And what they are doing is actually analyzing production teams. So they give hundreds of millions of dollars out to people to create content, and they are now measuring how well performing the production companies are producing content for them, how much it's on time, the quality of it, the ratings they get, and they're literally running a kind of league table. So I think we're going to see more and more of this, and they're definitely very keen on this whole concept of supply chain integration. In their model, if Gonzalo was making a production for me, I would give him the money for the production, and I would give him access to my cloud with all the tools. So he has no responsibility for technology other than creating the content, but it's already in my systems, archived in my systems. I can manage the whole thing. So I think we're going to see a lot more interest in this. You'll see this partner that we're working with is already operating, worldwide. So they'll be working with production companies going through this process and provisioning these systems kind of on demand for them. So as I mentioned briefly, having a common service platform is really one of the kind of key components. So if you think about our systems running on top of Azure, being able to, as a client, understand your total cost of operation on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis, you can literally see, how our services sitting on Azure are consuming the cloud and your Avid licenses. So bringing that all together, and even our partners, what we're planning to do is be able to plug in components and be able to measure how you're using those. How many licenses you've got of a partner solution, for example, will be part of your overall sort of subscription and your enterprise management. And in some ways, some of our customers, what they're asking for is more like a utility bill. It's like, okay, by production, tell me how much, each of these different production teams are consuming. And that is a bit of a shift, I think, for lots of customers who today maybe have deployed the capital and built the environments, but they don't really have to reconcile how much those are being used or how much they're costing on a sort of regular basis. So this is, I think, a big shift for lots of the clients. So tiered storage is interesting, right? So today we have high performance storage in the form of Nexus. Many of our customers have got the ISIS, the sort of previous generation of storage. But what we find is, in many cases, what clients are doing is they have multiple tiers. So they have the high performance storage for real-time editorial. They may have a nearline storage for sort of near archive, where they want more capacity, especially in things like reality television. They're shooting so much content, they don't need everything online immediately all the time. And then they'll have maybe a tape archive as the next tier. Now in the cloud, that's quite common to be called sort of hot, cool and cold storage. And really that's referring to the sort of the SLA or the policy, how quickly you can retrieve the storage. High performance is obviously real time. Nearline is the sort of cool storage, so it's available within an hour, something like that. And then archive is, maybe that's restorable within a day. When you have an environment in the cloud, actually, so in Azure, they're able to manage that with what they call one endpoint. So you have one file reference in our system, and it basically, we set policies on how quickly it can move into the lower tiers, and the price drops dramatically. So I think what you'll start seeing over the next few years is that the archive tiers become incredibly cheap, and it's really about how you build a workflow to be able to retrieve your assets. What many of our clients are doing is asking us to keep all the proxies for everything online all the time, and then using so that's really where you're doing your archive workflows, metadata workflows, perhaps review and approval type workflows. So all the research is happening against proxies, and then you use high performance for playout and editorial, and then nearline and archive for sort of the broader sort of workflows. And that can allow you to dramatically grow the amount of storage you have without growing your costs, because you're now more automatically pushing things into these other tiers. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is the last one of my examples here is, thinking about infrastructure optimization. So we have some of our very large clients who have large global newsrooms. When they look at their whole footprint, some of our clients are using only that infrastructure about 15%. So massive data centers, hundreds of servers. When they look at it all in aggregate, they're only using it about 15% of the time. And this is really where the cloud starts to provide some real benefits, because the cloud systems are designed to have very high utilization. That's how they drive their costs down, because you're sharing that infrastructure with many, many other clients. So that's really the kind of where the cost savings come from. Okay, so a couple of things to talk about here. So at NAB just a month ago, we announced a number of services and solutions, and I'll first talk about the services. So what we've basically done is created these components that we can configure into solutions, but we can also use them standalone. So Avid AI is the artificial intelligence service. It's basically a connector from our asset management systems and our Media Central system out to cognitive services. The first one we've launched with is the Microsoft Azure service. Inside the Azure environment, they also have content transformation services. So that's doing things like transcoding. So that's all part of their existing cloud. And again, transformation and doing kind of transcoding services is a very common use case for the cloud. Perhaps you sign, your sales department sign up a new distribution partner, and you need to package your programming in the form that they want delivery, right? So that might mean you've got to provide transcode into a new codec. You may have to do some compliance editing for them. So quite often, then you have your whole archive that you need to, or some programming that needs to be then repackaged in that mode. And this is where, in the cloud, transformation services become very valuable, because you can just run that workload, and you can decide yourself, I want to run it, in a day, and it's going to cost a lot of money, or I can run it basically low cost over the next couple of weeks. You get to choose how much you provision these resources when you're using these cloud services. So the collaboration service I mentioned, which is the sort of how the Pro Tools system works together, sharing projects, kind of like a shared folder mechanism. The storage, so on the storage side, what we're actually doing is our latest file system, so the Nexus file system, is actually abstracted from the underlying storage. So even though we sell it today on-prem, the drives and the file system can be abstracted. So we've started to put our file system, the Nexus file system, in the cloud itself. And what we'll be doing is actually creating a bridge between your storage on-prem and the storage in the cloud. So this would allow you to say, for example, if you need capacity, extra capacity for, I don't know, let's imagine there's an election or a political campaign that you're following. If you wanted to burst into the cloud for 3 weeks or a month, then basically you can reallocate and create a larger provision within your Nexus control server. You just literally say, I need more storage, and the cloud will provide that additional capacity. And then you can shrink again. So this gives you some ideas of kind of advanced sort of flexibility. The analytics stuff, what we're doing at the moment is actually making sure in our Media Central platform that we're building APIs so we can instrument more and more of the workflow. And with Microsoft, we're looking at, they have a number of kind of analytics tools through Microsoft Dynamics. So we've already got reporting through SQL Data Warehouse. So we're already doing that on our asset management, enterprise asset management workflows. But this is doing more advanced kind of analytics. So when we combine those, we've got two solutions I'll talk to. And first is editorial on demand, and the next is shared library. So what editorial on demand does is it takes a virtualized media composer, a simple asset manager, and that storage layer that I just mentioned, and it encapsulates it, wraps it in a service offering, so that, for example, if you've got an event and you need 5 edit suites, some simple asset management and some storage, you can dynamically provision the whole of that in the cloud. So no infrastructure at all. You literally just script that so that you can say, this production, you've got that for a week. They launch the solution, bring the content into that system, work on it, and then they shut it back down. So it's the equivalent of like having a kind of rental model. That's the way some clients are thinking about it. What the other thing is that you can do is if you have an enterprise system where you've got your archive, for example, you could provide access to their archive using this service, so that one of your independent production companies could basically access your archive, make the programming, and none of the content actually leaves your facility, because the whole thing is dynamically provisioned. So that's the first one, editorial on demand, we call that one. The other one is what we call shared library on demand. So we have some very large customers in the States who have actually now, one of them's got 60 TV stations and they're just acquiring another 40. So they're the largest broadcaster now in the US, called Sinclair Broadcasting. They're also one of our enterprise clients as well. What they want to do, and we're building for them, but to become a standard product, is this idea that you can create a shared library in the cloud. So they have multiple archives. They've got lots of duplicates in the archives from all the different TV stations, because when those TV stations started, they weren't part of one group. They've come from lots of different places. So as they've brought them all together, they now have realized that they want to be able to create, basically a large archive centrally in the cloud. So the idea is this is dynamically scalable. The stations all get connected to our platform, and then everyone can search in the archive. If somebody wants to move something from one station to another, it just moves up to the archive first, goes up into the cloud, and then it gets brought down. And so now you've got a copy in the cloud. And everything in all of the stations is indexed. So all our local systems provide an index, and that gets published to the cloud as well. So when you're searching, it's just like a sort of Google search, right? You can do a search, you can find anything in any station, but it's all basically, the index is in the cloud. You say, I want it, it moves it through the cloud and down to you. And that whole process is designed to be dynamic, it's flexible, it gets provisioned dynamically as they bring on new stations. We just add more capacity. The other piece to mention here is that as part of this workflow, we're also starting to do LTO migration services. So if you have an LTO archive, lots of clients are like, how do I go from my LTO archive to the cloud? So we have a professional services offering where we can now do that. It's early, so we're still working through that with clients, like how do we manage security, how do we manage, sometimes there's unions that we need to worry about, and how do we work through that whole process. But it's basically thinking through how do we get the kind of these assets up into the cloud. Okay, how am I doing for time? Shall I give you another 5 minutes? Is that okay? So I've got a few examples. So this is where we start to get a little bit more technical. So all of the examples I've talked about really at a very high level, sort of functionally, this is now describing how we actually build these as kind of logical components. So what we sometimes would call a reference architecture. So you could sit down with your teams and say, here's how we work today. These are some of the options that we'd like to consider. And we have these, our team who are here, we've got some of these available, so if people want to know more about this, please come and talk to us on the Datos booth. So this is quite a typical environment. So we have an enterprise with an on-premise solution with their typical Avid configuration, and they're using a thing called an express route, which is the connection to Azure, secure connection to Azure, and then basically we've got this cloud gateway where we've got the different storage tiers, right? So that's a very a relatively simple. You could think of it just as a kind of like Dropbox or iCloud sort of storage in the cloud. Once we've got things in the cloud, as I mentioned, then we can add these cognitive services, right? So these are optional. You don't need to consume all of the services. It's literally like a menu. You can just choose, now I want to add the AI services, for example. So some people want to do something they call content aggregation, which is really, how do I take all my assets and start to publish them to different platforms? So I'm going to go through a transformation process. And this is where you might have multiple facilities. So how do I think about newsroom management, where I want to aggregate it? You could also, there's a parallel here with shared library as well. So how do I sort of share more effectively between my operations? So I haven't talked about this too much. This is a concept or a product from Microsoft called Azure Stack. So Azure Stack is a configuration. Basically, it's a private configuration of the Azure cloud. So if you're, for example, concerned about security or compliance, or you're not allowed to put data in the cloud at all, that you can actually have your own instance of the Azure cloud running in your own data center. And why people want to do this is that this allows them to have a consistent way of managing all of that IT infrastructure, both on-prem and in the public cloud. And of course, if you are looking at your bigger IT infrastructure, you'll find a lot of applications where they want to do that. So maybe for tax reasons or compliance, other compliance reasons, they'll want to have systems that are separated. Yeah, so the other thing that people are very interested in is this idea of cloud-based publishing, especially when you think about the complexity of all the different platforms that you have to deliver to. And their rules are constantly changing. So, for example, you know, Amazon, Netflix have now got 4K video. They're introducing HDR video. You know, if you're going to then update your library, so let's say you shoot in HDR, but for most of your broadcast delivery, you're then packaging it in standard, you know, broadcast standards. You need the flexibility to be able to quickly kind of recreate these libraries in the highest possible resolution. And often there's money involved in that, right? So Netflix and Amazon will pay a premium for the high-res versions. Yeah, so that's more about distribution. One of the interesting things that Microsoft have also done with Azure is that they've got some very, because of the scale of Microsoft, they've got some very, very good relationships with Akamai and some of the other content peering partners. And you can have all of your content distribution and CDN as part of your Azure subscription as well. So that's a lot of broadcasters are using that. So NBC do the Olympics, and they use the Microsoft and Microsoft Azure and the Akamai CDN for all of that sort of content distribution model. So I'm going to actually end on this slide. So I've talked a lot about sort of the theory, but actually what the user sees now is our latest Media Central Cloud UX. So it's just been released, and in fact we've got a big update coming in June. This tool set is, as it says here, it's completely modernized. So the idea here is that we've got an app-based concept. So you have different apps that are running basically across the top. You've got lots of very rich metadata tools. So we can do all the searching and AI capabilities get basically presented here. It makes it very easy for journalists, producers, researchers to find assets incredibly fast, because we're leveraging all this kind of indexing that's happening in the cloud to build very, very efficient workflows. So you'll see more and more from us. It's also completely seamless between multiple devices. It's like dynamically reassigned, so we've got touch interfaces on tablets and smartphones. We've got the whole kind of browser-based solution. So Media Central Cloud UX is our sort of next generation, and this tool is really what is a real game changer. When you think about all of the flexibility of the cloud we've got behind the scenes, presenting it through this brand new interface, very, very fast, very logical for, sometimes we call them the millennials in the newsroom, right? You've got lots of younger people coming into the newsroom now. This is a tool that's really designed for the way they work, taking lots of parallels from, you know, the sort of social media tools they use and the other sort of online tools. Okay, and we're demoing it. Gonzalo's telling me we're demoing it on the Datos booth here. Okay, so any questions I can answer in the last couple of minutes? No questions? My presentation was that good. That's excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Yeah, perfect. No problem.
Just take these out.
Yeah.
No, es más fácil que ayer.